Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yacker. My guest on today's show is the Honorable Paul Hellyer, former Canadian Minister of National Defense. I'll be yakking with him about his book, Liberation, the Economics of Hope. Paul Hellyer, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
It's my pleasure to be here.
You said that Liberation, the Economics of Hope is your final and most important book. You are a prolific writer, and I know you have a loyal audience that follows you, and they look forward to reading your books. That being the case, I am curious as to why you refer to it as your final book, and why do you feel it's your most important book?
Well, actually, I am sure that it's my final book because I don't think my wife would let me write another one. But I'm not sure it's my most important book. I don't know whether it is or not. I have written 4 books in a series, starting with Light at the End of the Tunnel, The Survival Plan for the Human Species. That was written 11 years ago. When I wrote it, I thought it was my final book because it contained just about everything I knew at the time, had some suggestions for the planet and things that had to be done and so on. One, I said we had about 10 years to do something about global warming. It's now 11 years since it was written. Basically, we've done practically nothing since. And that is a very important issue that has to be looked at squarely in the face, or this planet will not be habitable for our young people, our grandchildren, and so on. And but then 4 years later, I had learned a lot more about what goes on in the universe and some of the things that were going on Earth. I decided I've got to write this. I've got the public domain because it's too important not to have in the public domain. And so I wrote that, and it has become something of a classic. And I would say maybe it's the most important book of the 4, but I wouldn't want to downgrade the other. The next one was really in a sense, spiritually oriented. I always say that what we're doing here is fighting a spiritual battle, and that's the way I wind up. I'd learned from the Creator how and why the cosmos was created, and the fact that we are all made of the same material, and that we are all brothers and sisters, regardless of the color of our skin. And so I wanted to put that into writing, and didn't have quite enough material for a book. And this one is, I think, very important because I'm very much interested in the financial system, the banking system. I have been for 70 years. That was the reason I went into politics in the first place. And so I haven't managed to get it changed yet. And we had this terrible depression, and I was a child of the depression, and I saw this poverty in its rawest form. And so at university, I've asked my professors if we needed recessions and depressions. And they said, well, that's part of the system. They keep happening. That wasn't my question. My question is that they're necessary. And in my opinion, they are not. There has never been a recession or depression that was necessary. They're all monetary phenomena, and none of them needed to happen. So I have been working away at this off and on for a lifetime, or rather long lifetime, and still am. When the pandemic came along, I knew at once that the system was going to crash, and that thousands and thousands of people were going to lose their jobs. Others were going to lose their houses and so on, and be out in the street. And that somebody had to do something about it. And that this was an opportune time to try and do what we have failed to do before, and that's to change the system. And I've been pushing the hot button that the Fed has got to go, that the Fed has to be nationalized, and that the governments have to create, I'm suggesting 34% of the new money created every year, which is enough to balance their budgets at the federal level and the state level and the municipal level, with taxes somewhat lower, a little bit lower than before. Not the magic bullet that some of my friends say, do this and you never have to tax anybody anymore. That is absolute rubbish, and should be known for that, because you still have to collect a lot of money through taxation, but you don't have to have austerity economics all the time, or most of the time, and starve important things like building hospitals and building bridges and and providing support for the people who are desperate and doing the things that human beings should be doing if they really believe that people are important. Other people are important, and they should pay some attention to them. So that was the motivation, and I decided to do something I've never done before, and that's, instead of writing an introduction to the book, to put in a section called disclosure, and it really relates to the 5 plagues, as I call them, that the cabal that I and others Scribe is running the show in the United States and elsewhere, have subjected us to. And they include, the important things like global warming and the financial system and electronic fields and all sorts of things that are bad that have to be addressed, and then said, these are the things that we have to look at right away and do something about it, or it's going to be too late. And we won't have a livable planet. We'll have a planet that's just going to be half the size that we require for the people who are inhabiting it. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, and it's been a long road, an interesting road, and one that apparently isn't quite over yet. And so I'm going to keep moving along and doing what I can to get people involved. I recently sent 280 books to members of Congress, the Senate, the administration, the US, with a personal letter, and they may resent it. I don't know. I don't really, it doesn't keep me awake at nights because I'm not running for anything. And so I don't have to worry what they think about me, but I wanted them to know what I think about what they have to do, which they haven't been doing because they didn't know what they had to do and nobody was telling them. And so this is the approach. So it's a good point to put in my best line from my first one of the 4 books, which was, I didn't know how much I didn't know because I didn't know how much there was to know. That's as true today as the day I wrote it, because it's just like a scroll, not one that opens up and then closes up when you put it away, but one that keeps opening up in both directions to infinity. It's an never-ending learning process of finding out what's going on, because the cosmos is such a fantastic place and so full of life of different sorts, different kinds and different appearances, that it's absolutely delightful, but you've got to know about it, and then you have to accommodate yourself to it and say, well, we want to live not only peacefully here and on Earth, which we haven't been very successful at, but we want to work with the good guys in the rest of the cosmos as friends and neighbors, and see if we can help each other in some ways. And that's certainly a very real possibility.
The first word in the title of your book, Liberation, the Economics of Hope, is obviously liberation. It is also quite telling and raises numerous questions. To cut to the chase, what must we be liberated from?
We have to be liberated from the control of the rich elite who think they should run our lives for us. And they're right into it again now. They're talking about a reset in the system, not to fix up one that's worthwhile for the people, but a reset, which is just another way that they'll have of taking away the value of the goods and services produced by working people. In other words, it's just another way of cheating, another way of skimming the cream off the milk. They're very ingenious, They talk about cyber currencies as if it's just something that's a wonderful thing that's going to happen to the world. Well, it's just like somebody coming along and picking your pockets. So if that's wonderful, I'm not really for pickpockets myself. I'd like to see the pockets open and the contents made available to the people who are starving and who have lost their jobs in the pandemic and whose rent is 2 or 3 months behind and so on.
Paul, you made headlines internationally in 2005 when you became the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to state unequivocally, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. What led you to that conclusion?
Well, it's an interesting story. When I was minister, I had seen sightings reports, and about 80% of the sightings were natural phenomena, Venus or a meteor or something, but 20% were not. They were unidentified flying objects. And so I didn't pay much attention because I was unifying the armed forces at the time, and it was a very difficult job. It took all of my energy to do what Bob McNamara and others said was more or less impossible, but something every minister would want to do if they had the guts to do it. So I did it. And I didn't pay much attention to the subject afterward until about, it's about 17 years ago now, when a young man from Ottawa, Pierre Junot, started sending me stuff about the UFOs and asking me if I would take an interest. And I told him I didn't have time to read it, which was the truth. He said, well, just put it on a shelf for a rainy day. And I said, well, I'll agree to that. Then he asked me to watch a 2-hour special for ABC Network in the US. Peter Jennings, an Ottawa producer, put together. And here were all these former United States Air Force pilots and former civil pilots and air traffic controllers and policemen who had all seen UFOs. And I said to myself, why would they lie? Would anybody pay them to lie, get up and lie and say, I've seen a UFO? I don't think so. So I tucked it away in the back of my head. And then Pierre sent me a book called The Day After Roswell by Colonel Philip Corso. And I said to myself, this will make interesting reading at the lodge this next summer. And so I put it away. And when summer came, I looked for it and couldn't find it. So I took The Life of Pi, which was entertaining, but I didn't realize for sure until near the end that it was fiction. Unlike that, the Corso's book, I recognize as being legitimate because I recognize the names of the generals and the Air Force bases and so on. But while I was reading it, my nephew came along and asked me about it. I told him, he said, well, I'm a skeptic. And I said, well, you're entitled to be a skeptic. It's still a free country, more or less. So he went home and 2 days later, I think it was, he phoned me and said, I was talking to the general and he said, every word is true and more. I had been invited to this show in Toronto by Victor Viggiani and Mike Bird, who were two genuine ufologists, but I had no intention of going because I was not a ufologist then. I am not now. I never will be. I'm just a politician who now has a fair amount of savvy about the subject, and that's all I claim. I realized when I read it, the United States Air Force could get us into a galactic war because they have a policy of shooting first and asking questions after. And I don't think the American people know what's going on. And I think they have a right to know because they're taxpayers, they're paying for this stuff and they should know what's going on. And so should we, because everything that happens in the United States affects us one way or another. I had come to the conclusion that I had a moral responsibility to say my piece and get it out into the public domain. But before I did that, I had to get my fiance's permission, the widow of my late best friend ever. And then I wanted to talk to the general personally and got Philip to give him a heads up. And I phoned him. And even before I could say, hello, how are you? He said, every word is true and more. And then 20 minutes he spent telling me the end, more as much as he could without violating his oath too much. And the most important thing was he said that United States officials have had face-to-face meetings with sentient beings from other star systems, period. Well, they didn't get here on rowboats and they didn't get here on, anything, balloons or anything else I could think of. I knew 100% that UFOs were real and that this was my responsibility with my background in defense to get that out into the public domain. And so I phoned either Victor or Mike, I can't remember which, and said, I'm coming. One of my sins is procrastination. And I hadn't told them that I wasn't coming. But it worked out fine in that particular case. And they were delighted, absolutely delighted. I left that line right to the end. And when I said it, Mike Bird said it made him the happiest he'd been his whole life to hear somebody of my background come out and say without any hesitation that UFOs were as real as the airplanes flying overhead, and they are. The only difference now is that you never know whether they're American or from some other place.
Different species of aliens, some say there are over 50 of them, have been visiting Earth for thousands of years. Do you know where they come from, what they look like, their reasons for visiting our planet?
First of all, I doubt that there have been 50 coming for thousands of years. Some have, and one of the cases that's best known in ufology was there was a flotilla of 50 flying saucers that came south over Central Europe in the early 1960s, I think it was 62. It was a close call because Lemnitzer was the commander-in-chief of the NATO forces there, and he was just about ready to push the button, get us another war. And the 50 turned around and went right back over the North Pole. And he was convinced they weren't Russian, that they had to be from elsewhere. So he ordered a study, and it took 3 or 4 years to do. And it was involved, I think, 2 or 3 countries, and they all did their part. And the name of the book, I think, was just it was just one word. And its conclusion was that there had been at least four species visiting Earth for thousands of years. Well, then this became known because former Vietnam, I don't know if it was a Vietnam veteran, took a reduction in rank to become the sergeant major, the top NCO, with a rating for the highest level of secrecy. And one night the colonel, when he thought he was bored, asked him if he'd like to read this. And he said yes. It changed his life forever. And after he got out, he started going around the world talking about it. The reason that I think that the number of species increased so fast, at least the ones that were identified, had a lot to do with the fact that we had developed atomic power. And the cosmos is a unity. Whatever we do affects other parts of the cosmos. These people from outside, I think they said the children are playing with matches and they're likely to blow themselves up and their planet with them and make it unlivable. We better go down and take a look. And that's when the traffic looked like weekend traffic because the different species came. I don't know how many there are. I don't think anybody does, but I know and have talked to personally somebody who was in the retrieval business who had a United States Army manual that listed 54 species. And that was a tremendous increase from my early days when Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell and I had agreed it was somewhere between 2 and 12. We were both a way off because we just didn't know that there were so many, and maybe at that stage there weren't so many, but they came later. And they look different. They're just, they have different, I think the common conception is of the Greys, who are shorter people, long skinny arms and great big black eyes and so on, and a slit for a nose. Most of the ones in our galaxy look like us. They are probably cousins. There have been visitors who could walk down the street and you would never know that you're looking at an alien. The tall whites were a bit like that. They weren't exactly the same maybe as the Venusians or someone, but the Venusians and the Pleiadians, I think you could get away with just walking down the street. The tall whites, the women dressed up as nuns and went into Las Vegas shopping, and nobody told that they weren't just ordinary shoppers. So they're different. They're different in looks. They're different in what they want. The big division is really between those species that are loyal to the creator, and most of those are represented by the Galactic Federation of Light, and it's an organization where they're very spiritual, very much behind the creator of the cosmos. And they have 4 or 5 different words for them: the one and the forever and the source. The others who are allied to the Draco reptilians, the Dracos who are on the other side with Lucifer, the errant son. Some people call him the evil one or Satan. They have been squaring off for a long, long period of time, thousands of years, and it wouldn't be surprising if they had to square off again. There are a lot of motherships around us at the present time. I saw a picture that was taken which showed a whole group of motherships between us and the sun. And there was a case on the 21st of February, and this shows, I think, mostly how much we're still not telling the truth and showing off what's going on. One of the men in the International Space Station was out walking in space to make some repairs on the station. A mothership about 8 miles long came and did a 180-degree turn around them, deliberately did it so they could be photographed and so on, and then went back off. One of my friends sent me an email with a picture, I guess it was Facebook, and I saw this guy working outside, and then I looked down in the corner, and here was this thing that looked like a huge sausage just coming in from the left-hand side. And just about then, the screen goes black and says, "This part has been removed due to copyright." Whose copyright? Who had time to copyright it? And the next time I looked, the black thing was gone. But 2 or 3 days ago, even the initial email was gone from my inbox. No sign of it.
Quite a few years ago, renowned astrophysicist Stephen Hawking warned of an alien invasion. That prompted you to voice a vigorous response wherein you defended extraterrestrials. What do you think made Stephen Hawking so fearful of aliens, and why did you feel obligated to defend them?
I think he just didn't know that they were around. I mean, he knew more about most his things than anybody, but I think he hadn't seen one. He hadn't spent time at Stephen Greer would, or Steve Bassett, or myself, or Paula Harris, or 1,000 other, well, you know, a lot of other people would studying this, was unaware that they were here and peaceful, and most of them wanted to do business with us in a nice way. And so I thought, and especially with his high standing in the scientific world, for him to create a fear mode in respect of them was not helpful. So in effect, I said that is a wrong assumption. You have to assume that they could have taken us over any time that they wanted to, and that most of them at least are benign, which they are. So it was just, again, a feeling that we needed more of the truth than just his conjecture. They might treat us as mice or rats or whatever, you know, normally some animals would do if they came across some food somewhere.
Do you think the time will come, hopefully in the not too distant future, when extraterrestrials will make their presence here on Earth known in a big way, and they'll reveal themselves to all of mankind instead of just a few select individuals, which seems to be what they have been doing?
I think that's a $64 trillion question, and I don't know the answer, and I don't think anybody knows the answer. I don't think the answer is yet knowable. But having said all that, I think it may not be as long in the future as some of us might even hope for, but it could happen reasonably soon, because I don't think all those motherships are out there for nothing. And I know that the cabal's getting the Nazi aspects of things. They're getting very itchy about taking over the world and making it into one of their liking. Possibility of a clash in foreseeable future is, I think, a greater reality than any of us would have said maybe even 5 years ago.
While your book lists the concerns you have about the sad state of our world, you have, to your credit, I compliment you for that, given detailed solutions for resolving them. When do you think this will start to happen, and who or what will be the catalyst that starts the ball rolling?
I'm looking for someone. I'm too old to be the one, but I'm looking for someone who not only is far-seeing, but who says to vested interests, look, I'm tired of hearing you say, just give us another 20 or 30 years to get the oil out of the ground. Because we can, we've got $1 trillion tied up down there, and we want to get it out. I'm tired of them taking the short view and the view that is detrimental to the public interest, and to say instead, we want to do the right thing for the planet and for the people, and they're tied together. And the sooner we get at it, the better. And we may be able to salvage the situation. But if we don't do something soon, it just keeps getting worse and worse, because one article after another talks about one we saw recently about the fact that the fish were not capable of developing fast enough, evolving is I guess the right word, evolving fast enough to keep up with the rising temperatures in the water. The food chain is going to be all out of kilter. You get the food chain out of kilter, a lot of people are going to starve. And these things, these are not mysteries. All you need to do is take a little time to study what the scientists are saying and then do something about it. It sounds easy, and theoretically it's easy, but then you get politicians who for some reason prefer to take their orders from people who already have too much to eat, too much to drink, and too many yachts and extra houses and so on, instead of thinking about the people whose lives are going to be endangered by the lack of immediate attention.
How can viewers of Paranormal Yacker go about ordering your book, Liberation, The Economics of Hope?
They're available through all the normal sources, but if you want an autographed copy, you can get it from my website, which is paulhellierweb.com. That's Paul, Hellyer, Hellyer.web.com. And then we autograph a copy for you and send it out to you. And it applies to all four of the last books and some others too, but mostly the last four, which are of varying interest to varying people. And I would recommend people try one or maybe two, depending on what their tastes really dictate to them.
Paul Hellyer, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. It's been an honor yakking with you. Thank you so much.
Not at all. And just remember that we're fighting a spiritual battle. The people who are listening to us have to opt for the light if we want to set the world right.
And I say amen to that. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. To be sure you don't miss any interviews on my free YouTube channel, all you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.